Hey, today I'm going to look at a couple data sources and the difference between a relationship. We're going to do a join, I'll show you where the union is, and then we're going to do data blending. So to begin with, I wanted to show you a relationship, and I'm using an Excel file for this called sports equipment that has two worksheets. One is price per dozen and the other is inventory. And they're both just two columns. One has quantity, the other has price. So I'm going to close that so I can open it in the data source pane. So in the bottom left, I'm going to choose the tab data source. And then in the blue area on the left, I'm going to choose Excel. And I'm going to find the sports equipment and open it. And now you notice that my canvas is black or blank. It tells me to go ahead and drag my tables over. I'm going to drag inventory over. This is because there's more than one worksheet, and so I have to choose how I want them to be used. So as I drag it over, it shows me the inventory with the two columns below. I'm going to drag price per dozen over and drop it. And now it shows me an orange line between the two, and if I hover my mouse over that, it says that this is a relationship between the inventory table and the price per dozen table. It's using the fields ball and ball, and if you look in the bottom left quadrant here, it also shows you the fields and how they're joined. You can choose different fields, like in case they were a different name for the headers or something. And you can also do your relationship, like your operator, is it going to be equal or greater than or whatever. I've always just done equal for my purposes. But anyway, I'm going to click on the inventory at the top, and you'll notice that that shows me the tables and the fields. The columns and the fields. So in the bottom, I have a field called ball and quantity, and on the right, this is the actual data, which is 4 rows. Now if I go click at the top on price per dozen, that's also now gray. And the bottom, the fields involved change to the price per dozen worksheet or table. And then the rows of data also change in the bottom right quadrant. And I want to show you what this looks like on a worksheet so that you can see how to use these. In the data pane on the left, I have an inventory table and a price per dozen table, and they're separate. They're treated separate. So relationships are not combined into like a new table or something like a join is. Now if I drag ball over and I drop it on my row shelf, I'm going to put measure names from my data pane onto columns, and then I'm going to put measure values onto the text tile. And you can see I'm going to get rid of count. The ball relationship, Tableau figured that out for me. It knows that those two fields are related, and so it looks like it's a cohesive mix of data. And they say that relationships are good because they handle this different aggregation. And we're going to look at an example of managers versus employees in a minute, where you see you only have one manager per employee, but you might have many sales by the employee, that kind of thing. So that's a one-to-many relationship. So now that we have looked at relationships, I want to take a moment and show you the same thing where we're going to do a join. So I'm going to go back to my data source tab here. I'm going to choose Excel. I'm going to go into the sports equipment, and I'm going to put inventory on my canvas. And this time I'm going to do it a little bit differently because I decided I wanted to do a join. And so I have the two worksheets over here in the left, but I'm going to click on inventory. I'm going to double click, and that moves me from the main logical layer into the physical layer, like what's behind that table. And this is where you would do joins or unions. You notice on the left here I have a new union. A union is when you take a table with 5 rows of data and you combine it with a table with 10 rows of data. You union them, and now you have 15 rows of data. And in that example, you have to match your column names and that kind of thing. Same number of columns. But for our purposes, I want to actually do a join. So I'm going to drag the price per dozen field over and drop it on the canvas. And you'll notice this time I don't have an orange line. I have an indication of how I'm joining it. And in this case, if I hover the mouse over that icon, it says it's an inventory, or excuse me, an inner join on the inventory and price per dozen. And it already figured out the join is supposed to be ball on the left and ball on the right. When you double click on the icon, it does open it up, and you could choose, like if I want to do a left join instead. And as you do that, the data would change. You can probably see in the bottom right, as I choose left, I have 4 rows of data. If I choose the right join, I now have 4 rows, but I've introduced some nulls here where they didn't match up. I could do a full outer, and now I have 6 rows of data. But I'm going to do a join, and it's going to find 2 of those items that match. So I'm in effect dropping 2 rows of data by doing a join at the physical layer. If I just double click, or I'll close the little join dialog, and I'm going to click on the X in the top right corner to leave the physical layer, and now I'm back on the main layer. This is actually called inventory because that's what I started with. I could rename it if I wanted to. I could come down here and say joined inventory, something like that, so you know what it is. Okay. And if I want to use these fields on a worksheet, they're presented a little bit differently. I have my inventory, which does have ball as well as ball. I probably would hide this ball. I'm not ever going to use it since it's the same thing. So I could right click on it and just choose hide, get it out of the mix. But it does tell me that quantity is coming from the original inventory table. So if I drag ball over to rows, I could then use, I can't use measure names. Let me see if I can get away with that. Measure names, and I want measure values to be on text. Yeah, I can use it. So in a minute, we're going to look at a data blend and the difference in how measure names reacts on that. But you can see I do have the same fields available to me. I don't have as many rows of data because of the way I joined it, but that's how you would use a join. Now I would like to do the same thing as a blend. Let's see, 2 data sources. So I'm going to go back into Excel, and I'm going to open sports equipment. And for my purposes here, this is just going to be inventory. It's going to rename the data source to be inventory, and that's fine. So what I'm going to do a little bit different here is I'm going to go up to the drop down by the data source icon, and I'm going to choose new data source from the drop down list, context list. I'm going to go to Excel. I'm going to choose sports equipment again, and this time I'm going to drag over price per dozen. So if I look at my drop-down list of data sources, you can see here I have 2. And you can't create a join between 2 data sources that are separate like that. So in order to combine the data, Tableau is going to do it for you on the actual worksheet. This kind of simulates what it would be like if you had 2 different data sources out on a Tableau server that you had connected to. So I'm going to go over to a new worksheet here so I can show you. In the top of the data pane, it does show me the names of the data sources, and you can rename them at will. It doesn't matter. It doesn't care. And if I was to put, let's see, ball on rows, I'm coming out of the price per dozen sports equipment worksheet. That's what's selected in lightly gray at the top. The moment I dragged that blue or ball field over, you'll notice that it put a little blue check mark up here. And that indicates that's now the primary data source on this worksheet. That's related to this worksheet, not any other. Now if I click on inventory at the top of the data pane, I can use fields out of that data source. And I'm going to drag quantity over and just drag it and drop it onto text. You can tell I didn't have quantity for football or golf, so it understands that that's a null value. It couldn't match it up. But it did find quantity for baseball and soccer. On the text tile itself, the field has a brown, orangey kind of check mark. And up in the top of the data pane, it also has an orange checkbox by inventory. And that's indicating it's the secondary data source. And the reason I mentioned that is earlier we used measure names. You can see here on the secondary data source, they're grayed out. You can only use measure names from the primary. So if I go back to the primary, I can now see those measure names, measure values fields, and I could use them if I wanted to. The other thing you can do is if it's a very complex column relationship, whatever, if there's a couple columns that are related, you can go up to Data and you can do Edit Blend Relationships. And Tableau makes a stab at establishing the relationship for you. But if you were doing something like where you were reporting on employees' sales for 3 months, you might want to say, okay, let's drag in the order date of sales, the name of the employee, things that make them unique, and join them that way in this blend. And if you don't like the automatic that Tableau chose, you can do custom. And then what you would do is add, and if there were other fields, I only have 2 fields, so it would show you all the field names, and on the left is the primary, on the right is the secondary, and you could set that new relationship up, the blend relationship. So that's another way to do it on the worksheet itself, and that's actually how you would pull in different data sources on different data Tableau servers. So the other one I wanted to show you real quick was, I'm going to get rid of that real quick and start over again. That's fine. It was warning me about I didn't have a relationship set up at that point because I took the primary field off the worksheet. I'm going to go ahead up to Data and I'm going to close the data sources here. Let's see, I have inventory, I can work with that. So I want to show you another way to add in additional tables. So let's say right now I'm using inventory and it's from the connection sports equipment. I think I'm going to do it one time using the sports equipment data, and then I'm going to do it again using a new workbook with different tables to look at, different worksheets. So I'm going to come up here to add, and I'm going to do again Microsoft Excel. I'm going to pick sports equipment, and this time I'm going to pick from sports equipment, which is now orange, the price per dozen, and I'm going to drag that onto my canvas. So this is another way that you can add a relationship successfully. Okay, I'm going to take it off just for a second, and I'm going to double click on inventory, and I'm going to price per dozen, drag price per dozen in. So this also is a way that you could add multiple tables. I'm still in the same one data source, and it'll let me do it either using 2 connections or 1 connection, and then I can just pick the worksheets. So I'm going to go ahead and close this real quick. Let's see, can I drag that out? Yeah. And I'm going to show you one other way to do it. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to close or remove this second connection, and I'm going to come up to new data source, grab that file one more time. Oops, sorry. So used to being at work, picking Tableau server. I want Excel and sports equipment. And I'd like to drag price per dozen and use it. And what I want to show you is if I drag it onto the canvas here, it's only available to that data source. So if I come back over here and I want to use something off of inventory, I really have no way to combine it with that other data source. So this is kind of showing you that you can't do joins on different data sources. They have to be the same data source. They can be different worksheets or tables in the same data source, but it has to be the same data source at the top here. Okay, and I did say I wanted to give you another example of how this would work. So what I'm going to do here is close this data source. Okay, and I want to close this other one too. And on the data menu, I'm just choosing close data source. And now I want to open a new data source, and I'm going to use a different Excel file for this. And I'm going to grab People. Okay, I want to make another connection. So in the top left, I'm going to go to Excel file. I'm not going to pick people, I'm going to pick sales. Okay, and over in the top left you can see I have people, and I have the sales workbook that has the managers, and then I have the people, which also sales, I wanted to be data. I'm sorry, I meant to say data. So if I, in the top left, if I click on people, I see managers is already on my canvas, and I do see managers listed below it in the gray area. If I select sales in my connection area, there's actually a different worksheet or table there called data, and I can drag that onto the canvas. So even though they're completely separate worksheets or workbooks, Excel files, I am able to create that relationship between them. And this time, if I hover over the orange relationship line, it shows that it found related fields called employee. So again, Tableau figured that out for me. It understood that I was trying to create a relationship there, and that it matched employee data to employee and the managers table. So that's another way that you can do a relationship, even though the workbooks themselves are completely different. And you can actually change these too. So I wanted to show you that also. If I was to click on the sales connection, I can do edit connection, and I can browse to a completely different workbook and say open and change to that. And this workbook has the employee field also. It has month and sales. And so the existing relationship was easy to translate. Tableau figured it out. So you can actually change these if you're using different worksheets, like if you are developing and you name them by date, and every date you want to use a different one to play around with, that kind of thing. But that's just a general overview of the different ways you can combine data in Tableau and what you would expect it to look like as you use it.